Every year WWE releases superstars, it's basically clockwork at this point. It's a part of the rotating wheel that never stops, and when some come in, others go out. There were some pretty shocking releases this year, and it wasn't exclusive to the superstars we see on the screen. For example, longtime employee Sue Aitchison was released. If you don't know who she is, she's one of the main names responsible for WWE's partnership with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. She was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2019 when she won the Warrior Award. Some of the names whose contracts expired were Becky Lynch, Bobby Lashley, MVP, and Ricochet, so they're not counted on this list. A large chunk of the releases tend to happen in the developmental stage, and some of the more prominent names released from NXT include Amari Miller, Zion Quinn, Scripps, formerly known as Reggie, and Gable Steveson. Gable Steveson was signed with the hopes of being the modern-day Kurt Angle, but everything just went downhill and WWE decided to cut their losses with both him and his brother, Damon Kemp. This list focuses on the major main roster releases in 2024, and we're going to look at what led to them being cut and what they're doing now. Jinder Mahal. 8 years after his return to WWE, Jinder Mahal was released for the second time in 10 years. Being the first WWE champion of Indian descent, his reign in 2017 got a lot of people talking as he shockingly went from an enhancement talent to a main eventer within a week. The WWE Championship run was really the peak of his overall wrestling career, and he was at the right place at the right time. WWE, particularly Vince McMahon, was eyeing India as a lucrative market and pushed for a major name to represent the nation of over 1.3 billion people. Unfortunately, the entire approach was rushed and completely botched, and Mahal had a WWE title reign that could be more accurately described as infamous. Still, he was the 50th man to be recognized as WWE Champion, a feat nobody can take away from him. He had an 8-day reign as United States Champion in 2018, but numerous injury spells kept him out for a while, and in 2024, he shockingly emerged as a world title contender. That and his interaction with The Rock would be his last hurrah, and in April, he announced that he was moving on. He's still the Mahara, competing on the independent scene, and he's a very busy man. He's been a part of the recently created Maple Leaf Pro Wrestling promotion from former TNA figure Scott D'Amore, and is on a bit of a world tour, competing in France and having future dates in Australia in 2025. He's going to be alongside the two men who helped him become world champions, the Singh brothers, aka the Bollywood Boys. Jinder Mahal has wasted no time in making a name for himself. Vir Mahan Sanga. Vir Mahan is one of the most comically bizarre cases on this year's WWE release list. He was signed to WWE after his baseball career ended and was a Performance Center creation. It only took 3 years to make his main roster debut, and he aligned with Jinder Mahal in a short-lived faction. Seeing some singles potential in him, WWE separated him from Jinder Mahal and fellow Indian star Shanky in the 2021 draft. This was when the Vir is Coming promos began, and it followed the same playbook as the Emelina in 2016 and 17. The Vir is Coming turned out to be an inside joke from people within WWE, and it was only after WrestleMania 38 when he finally returned and took out the Mysterios. He defeated both Rey and Dominic Mysterio in separate singles matches, and it seemed like a promising start, but he completely vanished into thin air before returning to NXT months later. He reunited with his old partner Sanga, who is also a part of this list. They once again flipped back onto the main roster and got drafted to Raw together, but after an absence and an unsuccessful set of matches, they were cut from WWE. Fightful reported that it was due to the budget cuts, and Sanga commented in a video on social media that WWE wants to enter the Indian market while not giving Indian superstars any opportunities to shine. Both members of Indashir are now back in their home country of India, where they're connecting with their roots again while maintaining top physical shape. Xia Li. We want to say that Xia Li's release was one of the saddest ones in 2024, but in reality, she's doing perfectly fine right now. Her 7-year tenure ended in WWE, with Xia Li becoming the first Chinese woman to compete in WWE. She also made history by becoming the first Chinese wrestler to enter the Royal Rumble match. It felt like she was one of the most underutilized women on the roster, and she was unfortunately grouped with Jinder Mahal and Indashir in the budget cuts. Her journey was a really hard one. She moved across the world to the United States from a completely different country and culture, China. She didn't even speak English when she arrived in the United States, and she made her way while learning a language drastically different from her own and adapted and made friends along the way. There seems to be a lot of respect for her within the WWE locker room, with Xia Li revealing that Becky Lynch went out of her way to help her and have a small program in 2023. She now goes by the name Ying Lee and is signed to TNA, a company that has a great track record in handling their female superstars. She also made her debut for Game Changer Wrestling and is looking to solidify herself as a big name in professional wrestling. We wouldn't be surprised to see her performing all around the world soon. Cameron Grimes. When Cameron Grimes was released a few days after Xia Li in April 2024, he posted a heartbreaking video where he broke down in tears. It was a painful one to watch if you were or are a Cameron Grimes fan, because he spoke from the heart about just how much he wanted to work and just how much he wanted to be a WWE superstar. He ended it on a positive note by thanking his fans and saying there was a fire lit under his backside to go somewhere else and prove to WWE why they were wrong. He was a big hit in NXT and had a successful run, especially when he was in that awesome storyline with Ted DiBiase and LA Knight. Technically speaking, Cameron Grimes is the last ever $1 million champion, a prize title held by some of the greats in the wrestling industry. He further cemented his success by having a 2-month run as a North American champion. He was one of the superstars most negatively affected by the shift to NXT 2.0, with the introduction of some major names like Braun Breaker. He still managed to reinvent himself a little bit and enjoyed consistent TV time, but he was getting increasingly out of place in NXT after over 3 years, and it was time for him to move to the main roster. The issues began after he joined the main roster, however. He beat Baron Corbin in 6 seconds on his debut, only to get shoved to the side with occasional appearances and dark matches. WWE sent him packing with a loss to Braun Breaker, and his fate ended up being that of a guy who WWE had no creative plans for. Still, he had a mission to bounce back, and that's exactly what he's doing now under his real name, Trevor Lee. That fire under his backside has led him to becoming a busy man. He's doing great on the independent scene and has wrestled 20 matches since his WWE release, even heading to Canada and Australia to compete. Trevor Lee is in the best physical shape of his life, and it looks like he's going to be fine outside of WWE. He has a mature outlook on the lack of TV time he faced on WWE's main roster. He said that he had to pester writers every week to get a spot and admitted that the writers have a stressful job trying to figure everything out. He also acknowledged that it's not easy to get a slot in a 2-hour show, and it shouldn't be either because it's WWE and it's meant to be the top of the top. Ultimately, he believes that he didn't take the opportunities that were given to him well enough, and he views it as a learning lesson for himself in the future. At 31 years old, he essentially is in his early stages of his wrestling career and has a long and big future ahead of him. We wouldn't be surprised to see him back in a few years. Odyssey Jones. Odyssey Jones is the sole exception on this list because WWE was forced to release him even though they were pushing him on television. He had one of the weirdest WWE runs on this list. He was in NXT for less than 2 years and was featured as a part of weekly television before an injury in 2022 made him miss most of the year. In 2023, he was drafted to Monday Night Raw and vanished from the face of the earth. The only time Odyssey Jones was mentioned by fans was a running gag over his pointless draft from NXT to Raw. It took over a year for WWE to finally have something for him, and it was a good spot to be in. The ever-growing dissent between Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods worsened when Kofi recruited Odyssey Jones to be on their side. He wasn't meant to replace Big E, but that was the story being told between Woods and Kingston. But just as Odyssey Jones was getting momentum and finally in the spotlight, domestic violence allegations against him resurfaced. As per WWE's policy against domestic violence, they instantly cut ties with him and there hasn't been a word from him since. It's hard to imagine that he'll be back in WWE if the allegations turn out to be true. Indi Hartwell. Indi Hartwell felt like she was just another name on the roster, which is a shame because she wasn't. She was making waves before she signed with WWE in 2019, and this was despite the fact that she was only 3 years into her wrestling career. Her run in NXT was a lot more enjoyable than the main roster because she was consistently associated with big names in the brand like Candice LeRae and Johnny Gargano. Together with Austin Theory, they were the way, and it was an enjoyable but short-lived run they had together, even winning the NXT women's titles. Nobody expected her to be the one to dethrone Roxanne Perez, but she at her moment enjoyed an impressive lineage of NXT women's champions. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to last for her, as an injury forced her to relinquish the title and give her the shortest reign in the history of the NXT Women's title. Her main roster run never took off, and it seems like even Candice LeRae benefited and got more TV time after Indy was released. The biggest problem is what we mentioned in the beginning. WWE built up such a strong women's roster that Indy Hartwell was just going to be another name. But she has a lot more to offer, and in hindsight, 2019 was probably not the best time for her to be in WWE. But at 28 years old, she has a long way to go. Considering how she was only released later in the year, she's currently going through a 3-month no-compete clause, and we presume that she's going to be back out there killing it. TNA looks like it would be a good fit for her, but whatever happens, she's likely going to return to WWE someday as a completely changed star. Tegan Knox. Tegan Knox's situation might be the only one on this list apart from Odyssey Jones where it's hard to blame WWE. Her release seemed to be a matter of when and not if. The Welsh star garnered a bit of a cult following throughout her time in NXT and WWE. People seemed to recognize her talent, but numerous spells on the sidelines led to her getting tagged as injury prone, and WWE cut her out quickly in 2021 when it looked like they were releasing their whole roster. She was brought back under Triple H, but it hardly felt like she had an opportunity to shine on the main roster. She had a brief alliance with Natalya, but nothing came of it, and she spent most of 2024 kind of just sitting and catering. It was a shame that her second release came just 2 weeks before her birthday, but there really was nothing being done with her, and she seems eager to move on as well. She was advertised for an event in her home country Wales in December despite being in the midway point of her release clause, but issues that weren't specified led to her appearance being cancelled. She will be a free agent again as of late January 2025 and is looking to get back into the thick of it. Baron Corbin. The most notable WWE release in 2024 was Baron Corbin, and it wasn't even close. For years, Baron Corbin had the unfortunate reputation of being just another guy and a villain who people wanted to see just go away. But behind the scenes, he had a great attitude and grew over the years. After falling short of expectations when he was pushed in 2017, he still managed to maintain strong roles in WWE, although to many, he wasn't hitting the mark. His NXT run proved to be a career resurgence, and we saw a side of him that was never seen in WWE before. It took him quite a few years to get there, but it looked like he was finally ready to be taken seriously as a superstar on the main roster. The move to the main roster turned out to be a complete and utter waste. Why he was even called up from NXT is unknown because there were no plans whatsoever for him. Corbin found himself playing a good guy for the first time in 8 years on the main roster, but he just didn't fit into the creative plans of Triple H. It was an unfortunate side effect of having too many superstars on the main roster, and it felt like his second shot at the big time was completely squandered. Baron Corbin, a guy who many considered a WWE lifer, was axed after over a decade with the company. Unfortunately, he was one of those guys who was negatively affected by the change in regime, but not everything is bad. For one, he seems to have established a good relationship with the superstars who walked through the locker room in the last decade. In 2024, more fans than ever acknowledge that Baron Corbin is a legitimate talent who worked hard to get where he was. There won't be any shortage of companies willing to sign him, and hopefully he will make the right decision if he does get back into wrestling. It would be a shame if his career ended after WWE, because it seems like he has a lot more to offer in the world of wrestling. He seems to be doing just fine after life in WWE, coming in second and first place in jiu-jitsu competitions and cooking a mean steak. If no other company picks him up, you best bet Food Network will. Unlike in the previous years, the releases we saw on the main roster, barring Odyssey Jones, didn't make it seem like WWE was firing them. For the most part, you can see that WWE simply had nothing for these superstars creatively and sent them packing in a more positive way, almost as if to tell them, "You're free, now show us what you got and prove us wrong." Like with most batches of releases, we're almost certainly going to have some returns at some point in the future. It's always sad to see people losing their jobs, but this is a list of very, very capable people, so they're going to be just fine.